Right, we're going to be talking a little bit about starting system diagnosis, and yes, it's another bad hair day, I know. But anyways, um, so we want to think about just in a fairly simple and basic general way about those items that could cause you a starting system problem. Okay, so let's talk about starting system diagnosis. So the first thing is common problems would be a no crank problem. No crank meaning the crankshaft is not spinning. So we are not initiating that intake compression power exhaust four-stroke cycle. So you don't hear the crank going, You don't hear that. You turn the key on, you go to the crank position. Maybe you hear a click, maybe you hear nothing, okay? So in most cases, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the battery, and we have a way of testing the battery and kind of really quickly deciding if it's a battery issue, it's a starter issue. And then we've got to think about things like maybe it's an alarm has been tripped and it's an alarm issue. Maybe it's a key issue. Maybe I'm not in park or neutral. Maybe my foot's not all the way depressed in the clutch, etc., etc. So the second scenario is what we call a slow cranking condition. And let's just back up for a moment. So in a no crank problem, probably 95% of the time it's a battery or battery connection issue, and sometimes it is a starter issue. We do go into more starter testing in Auto 2, but I want to be able to kind of help you identify the type of problem and then some simple ways of solving it. So the second condition is a slow cranking condition, where the crankshaft rotates, but it's rotating slower than normal. So it's going, or something like that. In this case, again, it could be a starter problem. It could be a battery problem. It could be a battery cable problem. It's possible it's a starter problem, but usually when we get a slow cranking situation, 95% of the time it's battery state of charge or battery cables. Could it be an internal mechanical condition in the engine? It's possible. Fairly unlikely, but it does happen once in a while. Okay. The third one is what we call solenoid clicking, where we hear a single or a rapid click, but the engine is not being spun over, so we're not initiating the four-stroke cycle. And I've got a starter motor here, and I've got the solenoid off. I'm going to turn the camera down so you can see it a little better. And so the solenoid would be represented by my hand, which is a coil of wire. When I put current through it, it makes a magnetic field, and it pulls this plunger and centers it in the magnetism, okay? So sometimes what will happen is if a battery has enough power, enough charge to pull this out, but not enough to spin the starter. So sometimes you'll hear it go just like that, or you'll hear some rapid clicking. And it can be because there's a problem inside the starter with the brushes contacting what's called the commutator, and that's an Auto 2 thing. But usually it's a battery with a low state of charge. So I wanted you to be able to identify when I said solenoid clicking, talking about the solenoid moving the starter pinion gear out and meshing it with the flywheel, but not being able to spin it. This starter I've got partially apart, and what you can see is here's the solenoid, and here's the arm that moves the starter gear out, etc. Our next scenario is different types of noises that can come out of the starter motor that are caused by maybe the starter's overrunning clutch or drive mechanism not holding the gear in with the flywheel, or maybe it's the flywheel teeth itself. So I grabbed an automatic transmission flex plate, which has a ring gear for the starter to engage the teeth. And if you look around on this ring gear, we've got some pretty bad wear right here. You can see the gear from the starter has eaten these teeth away. That's pretty bad. This one was making incredible noises because the plate was all cracked. So this part is bolted to the crankshaft, and it was not wanting to spin the crankshaft and was making all kinds of whining and complaining noises. So sometimes we can get a flywheel screech, and that's usually caused by some sort of problem on the teeth between the starter and the flywheel. But we want to be able to tell, like when a student says to me, Mr. Lumpkin, my car's not starting, and I'll say, okay, when you say that, what happens when you go to start it? Does the crankshaft spin? Do you hear the of the crankshaft and the pistons going up and down? And it's important to identify what's happening because if the cranking speed is normal, spinning is going and it's not starting the engine, well, we obviously don't have a battery problem, or most likely we don't. We've got some other kind of a problem. So people are quick to replace batteries. People are quick to replace starters when they're not really sure what the issue is. So hopefully this helps just at least a little bit kind of separating the different conditions that can be. So further, we're going to look for these kinds of problems. First, we're going to start at the battery, and we're going to check the cable connections there and there. We can clean those, and I've shown you how to service the battery and do that. We're going to check the water. We're going to fully charge it. We can also do a load test. We didn't do a load test in Auto 1, but in Auto 2 we do that, and that's like putting the battery on a treadmill and really stressing it like we do a human body. This is a fender-mounted solenoid that Fords have used for years and years. These have contacts. These are a high source of failure. The starter itself can be a problem. A neutral safety switch that's bad in the shift mechanism of the transmission. A lot of times these now are down on modern cars, down on the transmission itself, and they can be a problem. We can also have a problem with ignition switch. The ignition switch itself is having an issue, and that's why we're not starting. What's not in this picture is the computer, the anti-theft system, the key chip mechanism or communication between the computer and the key. So there are some other items in here. But if we can kind of think about the system and the components that are in it, then we can come up with a fairly straightforward, logical process of elimination or diagnosis path to solve what the problem is. But 95% of the time, all no start, no crank problems are going to be right here at the battery. Okay, remember that. That's important. Okay, so we're going to do what's called a headlight test. And a headlight test gives us a method of trying to diagnose quickly, without any tools, is the reason why the engine's not starting because of a battery or something else. So we're going to turn on the headlights, and I'll make a little video and clip it to this one so it's with this. We're going to turn on the headlights and we're going to try and start the engine. In a normal scenario, the engine cranks at a normal speed and starts up within 1 or 2 seconds usually. And in that time, when we first do it, the headlights will dim slightly. You'll see them on almost all cars. They'll dim while you're cranking this car, and then they'll go brighter once it starts, and that's a normal functioning car. So if we try and start a car with the headlights on and there's no cranking, and the headlights go, and the headlights never come on, well, if the headlights never come on, you can be pretty sure you got a battery issue. We want to go straight to the battery and check it out, and check the water, and clean the connections, and check the voltage, etc. If we were to, so this would mean, like it says here, a dead battery or bad battery connections, okay? If the headlights go dim or out when we're cranking the engine, so we go to crank the engine, but the engine's not turning over, and they dim way down, or they actually go out, or the engine does crank slowly, and the headlights are real dim, or maybe they go entirely out while it's cranking, you can be pretty sure that we've got a battery with a low state of charge. We have poor battery connections, my abbreviation B+ for battery connections. We have heavy current draw, which can be a problem inside the starter, or the least likely cause is something mechanically wrong in the engine that's making the engine too hard to crank or to spin over. But usually we've got a battery with a low state of charge. Here's the other scenario that's really important to think about, because this is sort of your differentiating point. Let's say that you go to crank the car and it does not crank, and the headlights stay bright. They don't dim at all. In that case, you know it's not a battery issue. The starter motor is not even trying to pull power from the battery. The problem could be with the starter. It could be with that neutral safety switch that doesn't let you start unless the car's in park or neutral for safety, or a clutch safety switch that doesn't let the car start unless the clutch pedal is depressed fully so you don't start in gear. Or it could be ignition system fault in that case. Or what about an alarm? It could be an alarm's tripped, or a key issue where the chip is not talking to the transceiver and communicating with the computer, or it could be a computer issue. But usually when the headlights stay bright and there's no cranking, which means that the starter's not even trying to pull power, or it's not able to pull power, that it's something in the control of the starter. When I say control, these two would be in the control, the alarm would be in the control, the computer would be in the control. It could be in the starter itself, but we're not thinking battery. Is it smart for us to go and do a quick look at the battery and make sure cables are clean and it's full of charge and that kind of, yes, it's important that we should do that. But the reason why I like this headlight test is you can turn on the headlights, and if they don't come on and the dash lights don't come on, you know the battery's dead. It's completely dead or completely disconnected. But if you turn the headlights on and they're on, then you've got probably one of three scenarios. Assuming it doesn't start, maybe it cranks slow and the lights dim. Maybe when it cranks slow and the lights dim, they actually dim down so far they actually go out. You know, in that case, it's trying to pull power out of the battery. So it's not that the starter is not working. It may not be working right, but it is working to some degree, and it's trying to pull power from the battery. And usually that means that the problem is in the battery. But again, if the headlights don't dim, then you don't necessarily have a battery issue. You've got something that's the starter or the starter control is not trying to pull power out of the battery. So you can't say the battery's at fault in that condition. So I'm going to do this for you. So a couple other things to think about before I show that to you. There can be major components that bring power from the battery to like an underhood fuse box. We used to have what's called fusible links, but now we have these large 110 to 150 amp max fuses right in the front of the underhood fuse panel, and I'll show you one. And those could be blown and could be a fault, and that happens at times when people go to jump a battery or jump a car with a dead battery, and they hook the leads up backwards, and they blow a bunch of major fuses, and we have to replace those fuses to be able to get the car working correctly again. It's possible to hurt a computer module doing that, but usually these days I've seen it a couple of times where people have hooked up battery jumper cables or jumper pack backwards, and it burns a number of fuses. Checking the battery. This is just a reminder that because so many no start, no crank issues are with the battery, we want to verify the battery condition, which means, is the water full? We call it the electrolyte. Remember, 64% water and 36% sulfuric acid on a fully charged automotive battery. Is the electrolyte level full? The water, is the specific gravity of those cells correct? Most technicians don't check specific gravity. They just use a voltmeter and make sure that it's got the correct voltage range. Are the connections clean? We can load test it if necessary. If we want to give the battery a really thorough testing, we can get a battery load tester and see how much current it's flowing. Is it able to flow half of its rated cold cranking amperage for 15 seconds and the voltage stay above 9.6 volts? That's how we do that. We can do what's called a cranking voltage test. This is where we just hook up a battery, a voltmeter to the battery, and we measure the voltage at the battery during cranking. We want to see what it is. So I just put down here, connect a voltmeter, disable the engine. If we're just going to do the measurement, we'll do it with it disabled. Obviously, for diagnosing an engine, we probably wouldn't disable it. We would probably just crank the car and see what the voltage is. So, and the way we can disable the engine, older school cars, we used to disconnect the coil primary supply. These days, or ground the coil wire. These days, we disable the electric fuel pump. We take the fuel pump fuse out. That's the best way to disable it. And we're going to crank for 5 seconds and measure the voltage. And what we should see, and I'll do this, I'll disable my Tundra fuel pump, and we'll crank it, and we'll probably see somewhere between 10 and 11 volts. That's normal cranking voltage over the fully charged lead acid 12.6 volt battery. Most likely we're going to see maybe 10 to 11 volts during cranking. That's normal, but we want the cranking speed to be normal as well. We want the sound of it to be normal as well. So what we're going to do is I'll take the fuel pump fuse out of my 04 Tundra. We will go ahead and crank it and see what the voltage is. And in this case, the car doesn't have a problem, so I want you to see what a normal car looks like on the voltmeter when we're cranking, about 10 to 11 volts. That's because we're consuming a couple of volts pushing the current through the starting system and spinning the engine. And then we'll do that that starter headlight test, or the headlight test, to kind of verify if the starting system's even trying to pull power from the battery. Okay, let's do that. Okay, here we are out at my 04 Toyota Tundra, and I'm going to back this up a little bit so you can see me and the headlights. And so you can see the headlights here. I'm going to go ahead and turn them on, and you can see them. And so hopefully what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and try and crank the car, and it's going to crank, and you're going to see these headlights dim down. So I'll do it a couple of times. I'll just kind of go 1, 2, 3 with my hand. You'll see it cranking. I'll stop and go 1, 2, 3, and we'll try it again. Also, hopefully the camera will record the cranking speed. Now there's a tractor up there working. I don't know how much of that's going to block it out. So let's try it. Here we go. This is our headlamp test to decide if the starter motor is doing the right thing, cranking speed's right. Here we go again. One more time. Okay, so you should have been able to see pretty clearly, because I could see the headlights bouncing off the computer, and I could see that the light was dimming while it was cranking. So that's normal. The cranking speed is normal. The car starts within a few seconds. The headlights do dim. That tells me the starter is pulling power. The voltage, the electrical pressure of the battery is dropping down because it has heavy load and it's trying to push current through the starting system. All right, so let me pause for a moment. Okay, so here we are under the hood of this 04 Tundra. You can see the batteries here. Here is an upper radiator hose. Here's the intake manifold with the 6 tubes, because it's a V6 engine, 3-inch cylinders on this side, 3 on that side. The belts are towards the center, so we know it's a longitudinal engine. So you can see the belts up there are pointing towards the front, and this has a belt-driven fan that you can see, and you can see the aluminum fan clutch, and there's a nice big fan shroud for cooling, and then there's the radiator here. There's the radiator cap. Here's the coolant recovery tank. So here's a fuse, underhood fuse panel, and I will pop this off. And inside here, we're going to look for a fuel pump fuse or relay. Now you guys may see it before I do because you're fast. I see this EFI number 2 fuse. I see an EFI number 1 fuse. But do I see a fuel pump fuse? Okay. So I just see the ones that say EFI number 1, etc. So what I'm going to do is go to the Mitchell Protoman, and I'm going to look up which fuse it is. So I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay, so Mitchell Protoman showed me that this EFI number 2 fuse should kill the fuel pump right here. That one right there. So I'll set it down on top of the battery. And that was this guy right here, EFI number 2. I think you can see it there. That 10 amp fuse right next to a 10 amp AC fuse, which would be the fuse for the AC compressor clutch. So now we'll see if that will, the reason why we did that, let's see if it kills the engine. I'm going to back this up. So again, we're going to look at the headlights. So what should happen when I turn the headlights on and start the car, it should keep cranking. obviously that didn't kill the car. Let's make sure I got the right fuse. Okay, so that fuse, I must have misread it. We'll have to look again. Was supposed to kill power to the circuit opening relay. And so pull the relay out. I'll leave it there. Let's try cranking the engine. See if it'll crank. Okay, so that won't allow the engine to crank. So that kills two functions. So we haven't been able to find an isolating function. So let me try again. Hang on a sec. Okay, so this is a really fun situation. So we pulled that circuit opening relay out. Let me just pull the camera forward. And then all of a sudden it didn't want to start. So we thought, oh, okay, it's controlling cranking. Well, I put it back in. It's doing the same thing. So guess what happened? My starter motor malfunctioned during this test, which is kind of cool because it's a real live diagnosis problem. So let's do this. So right now, the fuses are back in. Okay, so this is a really kind of fun problem. When I pulled the circuit opening relay out, it still started. And so I was like, oh, that's not going to kill the car. And then I go to start it again, and now it doesn't want to start. It doesn't want to crank. I've got crank no start. And I put the relay back in, and it still got crank no start. Fuses in, relays in. I don't have anything out, and I've got a crank no start situation. Let's see if it does it now when we're recording. So this is a real live diagnosis situation. And I think it's probably the contacts in the starter, but we'll check it out. Let's see what happens. So let's do the headlight test. Turn the headlights on. So headlights are on. Yeah, let's try and start it. Okay, so this is like a classic scenario where the headlights are not dimming. So you're thinking, okay, it's not trying to pull power from the starter, but you can hear the audible click, one click, and you heard it multiple times because I was going like this. But the pinion gear is being pushed out into the flywheel, but it's not spinning the starter. So pretty much likely it's the contacts in the starter solenoid or the brushes inside the starter, but it's probably a starter situation. Here's how we're going to diagnose it further. It didn't dim the headlights. Just for kicks, we'll check the voltage with the voltmeter across the battery, and you'll see that it's not pulling power that way. So what started to be out a fairly mundane kind of test proved to create a problem, which we're glad the problem happened here instead of somewhere we're stuck on the road. So we'll put this voltmeter to V for volts, and I'll pull this forward, and you guys can read that. I can see that. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the black lead to negative and the red lead to positive. Remember, if you hook it up backwards, it's okay. It'll just read backwards. So it's showing 12.56 volts. Let's go ahead and try and crank it. Let's see what the voltage goes to. Now, of course, it's cranking. So whatever problem we had in the contact on the starter, it's got this self-healing feature. So I'm going to pull that circuit opening relay out, and I expect it to crank but not start. Let's see what the voltage goes to. So with the key on and the headlights on, it looks like about 12.17. Here we go, let's crank it. One more time, watch that voltmeter. Okay, there it goes. It's doing it again. So we're starting to get some intermittent contacts on the starter, but if I saw it correctly from inside the car, it looked like it went down to about 11.2 volts while it was cranking. You could hear that a couple of times it cranked and a couple of times it just clicked. So the contacts in the starter are starting to go. But in any ways, our headlight test proved valid because when it wasn't starting, the headlights did not dim, which means the starter was not trying to pull power from the battery. There's a problem inside the starter. And we're pretty sure it's inside the starter because we could hear the gear flicking out. So we know that it's getting the command and it's moving the gear out, but it's not actually spinning it. So the headlight test helped us to know it wasn't the battery. And now I know that I got to pull the starter out and fix those contacts. And so I'll probably do that and then show you the video and clip it to this one so you know how to do it. Okay, that's it for now. We're going to give a brief video on removing a starter motor. And the first thing we're doing is 04 Tundra, put our safety glasses on. We're going to go ahead and take the negative battery cable off, and that's always our first concern, because we don't want to touch the positive lead where it attaches on the starter and get an arc. This, of course, clears computer memory, so you have to rerun monitors if you have to pass them on. Normally, it's a 10 millimeter on a Toyota, but because I've got an aftermarket clamp here, this is a 1/2 inch size right there. So the battery's disconnected. So next, we're going to raise the vehicle. But before we raise the vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and show you where the starter is so you can see what's going on down here. So here's the engine bay. You can see real clear, my headlamp's helping. And over here on the passenger side down here below the intake manifold, or the exhaust manifold, there's the starter. So I'll go down here with my camera and you should be able to see it down there. There it is. And we get it from the bottom, but we also sometimes can get to these through the wheel well. So there's the starter there. So we've got a little flap here. So we'll put this up in the air, rock it, make sure it's safe. And then we'll go ahead and take that tire off and see what the quickest way to get to that's going to be. Okay, we have this up in the air, and I think it's going to be much easier to take it out from the bottom here. There's the starter right there that clamps off. We got to take this battery positive lead off, which is a 12 millimeter, and then we unplug that guy there. And I'll do that right now. So hopefully you can watch me do that. Push this little tab. Should be, I believe we're pushing that tab, but it looks like maybe it's on the top. Okay, no, I think it's there, but I'm having trouble doing it with my right hand. Let me see if I can. Okay. I can push and pull. No, I'm not getting it. I'm probably going to need to use two hands. And then the two bolts that hold the starter in are this one here and that one there. There's two 14 mils. And so we'll get those. Let me pause and I'll get that connector off. Okay, you see this tab here. If I push out with a screwdriver, I wasn't able to push it with my finger and then it comes right out. So I just had to push that tab right there and it came right out. Then I got to get that 12 millimeter off. I'll take a socket and, oh, it's a 14. Sorry. No, I'm wrong. I grabbed a 10 that was in the 12 spot. It is a 12, so my eyes were right, but I grabbed a socket that was in the wrong spot. There goes that nut, put that away. All we have to do is those two screws on the outside. So let's reposition ourselves here. So I'm going to take a really long extension, and it'd be nice to have a air ratchet or something, but we'll just do it by hand. So we'll get this guy. That was tight. Okay. Okay, and I have a 1/2 inch extension that's easily this long. There's the first starter bolt. I think I got the right one. Let's hope I did. Let me take a look. Yeah, I did. I got the right one. So I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/2 inch ratchet and get that other one. Sorry for the delay. If I can get up there and get that guy. Okay, so I need a little more length. All right, let's see if we can get this one way back here. Oh, my angle's not really great. Hopefully I can get it right there. And that's a little tough. So it looks like I'm going to have to get a swivel on it. Okay, I've got a swivel on here. So let's see if I can get it with a little bit of angle. Okay, there we go. Okay, I don't know if I broke it loose, but I have a feeling that I did. Yeah, I did. Okay, so I'll take that off and I'll get my ratchet. So that was a lot of extension with a 1/2 inch breaker bar with an adapter and the swivel socket. So let's bolt and then we're out. Unless I'm missing something. Sometimes there's a metal bracket that holds starters in, but I didn't see it on the back side of it, but I didn't see it. All right, so we just dropped the starter out on the floor. That was dumb. You gotta love how the instructor can be so stupid. I let the starter fall out of there, didn't pay attention. And I'll be honest with you, grease on the lip. I don't think I've ever done that before. Look at that, grease on the lip. You get it? There we go. I don't think I've ever dropped a starter before. Look what it did to the case. Check it out. So if you're laughing right now, you should be laughing. It broke the case. It broke the cover anyways on the starter. So that was pretty lame. But I'm going to go ahead and take this apart anyways and look it over. And you're going to see inside here when we take this cover off that there's some contacts and they're probably what the problem is. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Let me turn this down here. And these look like 6 millimeters. So we're going to go ahead and take, see if I'm right. Yep. And if I was doing this and getting paid to do it, I'd probably have a battery operated ratchet here to go a little faster. Take these off, it'll just take a moment. So if you're done laughing, you should really have laughed for a long time. Mr. L pulled that bolt out and let that starter fall. This car has 498,000 miles on it. I have no idea how many miles are on the starter. I actually got a new starter just in case, but I probably wouldn't have needed it had I not dropped that. Now that I dropped that, I probably will need that. Unless, of course, I can find another one of these covers around in the shop, which I might have. So we'll take a look. Okay, so there comes the cover off. And inside here is the plunger that gets sucked down in the solenoid. And what happens on these usually is this corrosion right here. Let me see if I can get it to focus. Yeah, there it goes. You see all the corrosion on the edge there. And that has got a pretty good step in it. So it's corroded pretty bad. And those contact on these two metal contacts down inside the starter. Let me see if I can get the focus. There we go. Let me get my screwdriver so you can see it. That disc has made a step right here. And it looks like it was only touching right there and right there. This one was touching right there. Okay. So probably that was our problem, was just this guy's not contacting real well. And we can likely replace that contact. But the question is, do we want to replace the starter, or do we want to see if I have another starter that I can get the cover off of this guy? Okay. So that may take care of it, just sanding those right there. Getting a new contact in here and sanding that may take care of it. But there are brushes in here under this cover that that touch on the commutator, and so this is showing a Toyota factory starter motor. So it kind of makes me wonder how old it is and how long it's been in there. And do I want to go through the trouble to replace it, or do I want to go ahead and put a $150 brand new one in? And here's the brand new one. You can see it's all nice, clean, and all that. So this is this is probably made in Mexico or China or something. Let me get that right back on there. Anyways, let's see what it says. Does it say hecho en Mexico? This one, it's a new starter. Doesn't say where it's made. All right, I think what I'll do is see if I have a cover for this old one. Okay, I'm going to make the decision to put the new starter in because I do have another one of these Densos, but it's not the exact one. And the other thing about this is I can clean these contacts up, but I haven't done anything for the starter brushes that are inside. So in this case, I think I'm going to go ahead and put the new starter in because I depend on this truck and I lend it out a lot. And I don't want anybody to be stuck on the side of the road. So they give a whole spec sheet with this new starter. It tells all kinds of performance measures, etc. So let's put this guy back up in there without dropping it. Okay, what I'm going to do is I took this gasket scraper and went up here and cleaned this off, and I'm going to hold this up so you can see a little better. So I went up and scraped this off right here. So there's no grease or anything that's going to keep the starter from sitting flush. And now what I'm going to do, let me see if the camera's in a good spot. I'm going to go ahead and take chem tool and a rag, put some chem tool on there and go up in there and just clean that surface of it. Just don't want the starter to not be sitting all the way down flush where it should be. Okay, good. Let me grab the starter. Okay, I'm going to put the starter up in there. And when I do, I want to make sure that it goes up in there like this. Sorry if I'm blocking your view. Okay, so it goes in there like that. Right there. And I'm going to put this bottom bolt in. It's threaded in so I don't drop it. There it is. Okay, so that bolt is started. So I'm going to move this around over here and see if you can see what I'm doing there. I think you can. take my swivel and see if I can start that upper bolt in. Might be a little hard unless let's see if it wants to go in. It looks like it's threading in, so let me snug up the bottom one more. Oop. Started kind of flopped out of there. I'll reach up there and get this top bolt started. So now that I've dropped the wrench and you're on the floor laughing again, okay, I got that upper bolt in. If you're not laughing right now, you should be. But hey, you know, what can I say? We only do this kind of stuff, make these mistakes when when everybody's watching. You don't make them so much when nobody's watching. But hey, that's why we get so much money for what we do. Here we go. Okay, snugging up the top bolt. Okay, and I might look and see if there's a torque on these, or just snug them up real tight. Sometimes what I do is just put a combination wrench on them to snug them up. See if I can do that. So I'm going to reach up in there and put a combo wrench. Make sure it's tight. That wasn't quite tight enough. That's tighter. Okay, that's probably 45. Let me try the top one. See if I can get my arm up there on the top one. There it is. Okay. Okay. That one moved up again. Okay, so I'm having trouble getting on there. So I'll just try and do that top one with the swivel. Okay, I tightened that up pretty good. Okay, those two are tight. So now we got to get here. Get our eyes up on that starter. Let's go ahead and hook our electrical up. We'll go ahead and take this nut off. There may be a lock washer underneath. Isn't in this case, the nut goes right there. Now, one thing I can do is clean this off. I'll get a wire brush and clean that off. So I can take this end of this guy and just clean it to make sure it's getting a good contact. There's no garbage there that will keep it from contacting really good. And then I'll clean it with a little bit of clean tool. I'll go ahead and take my rag with some chem tool and just clean it off. Okay. So I'll go ahead and put this up. Snug that up with a 12 mil. And make sure we don't go too crazy tight. That thing's a copper bolt, and you can't, copper stud, and it can't take a lot. So let's snug it up. Okay, that's snug, and then Let this guy get in. Okay. So everything's tight. Our connections are there. We have a little cap cover there. We're gonna hopefully that thing will stay on there. Gives us a little protection so nothing hits it. This guy was a clamp that bolted on somewhere, and it looks like it went right there underneath that bolt. I think I'll go ahead and take that bolt out, that 14, and put that clamp back underneath there. Okay, so I got that clamp back on, and now I'm just snugging it back up. It's just supposed to keep that battery cable from flopping around, hitting anything. Okay, so that's tightened up. So we're back together. That's tight, that's plugged in, that's tight. The starter's tight. So now we just need to drop the car. And let me turn this down like this. Let me show you what I was using to get that starter out. The brightness too much out there. I was using this right here. This long extension with this swivel on it. Of course you can see me, that's what I see when I'm doing my stuff. So hopefully you can see that with other than a couple of pauses, you can see it's only been 20 minutes making this video, so it didn't take very long to change the starter. I paused a couple times to grab tools. But anyways, the negative cable's back on. I'll take my half-inch combo and snug that up. Remember, the really critical part is that it's tight, is that I don't touch the wrench across each of those. And let's go ahead and start this thing and see how it sounds. So my experience is that every starter motor tends to have its own sound. So this will probably sound different than the other one. So it starts good, and it does have a slightly different sound than the other one. So, all right, so that's it. So we're good to go.